I've been anticipating Black Adam for a while now, and I've been fortunate enough to stay away from the trailers and any spoilers. So, how is The Rock's entry into superherodom? Nearly 5,000 years after he was bestowed with the almighty powers of the gods, Black Adam is freed from his earthly tomb, ready to unleash his unique form of justice on the modern world. Alright, so I'm going to stay away from plot specifics just to keep this spoiler free. Now, apparently, a scene was already released by Dwayne Johnson, so if you haven't seen it and you don't want spoilers, I would just avoid seeing any type of posts by The Rock. We got Dwayne Johnson playing the title character, and he's an anti-hero and has a costume very similar to Shazam's, which is explained. Now, there's this large exposition dump to start the movie off, and it just gives us all kinds of background on the history of the person that becomes Black Adam. This went on a little longer than I thought it would, but it ends up giving us a lot of the context to establish the world and the motivations before thrusting us right into the action. And there is a lot of action in this. Black Adam is kind of like Superman. I mean, he's got some crazy powers and looks to be basically indestructible. Now, the first action sequence that we watch showcases some of what he can do, and the graphics and the effects, I think, are impressive and exciting. Now, something that stood out to me, and sometimes it was used well and other times it was just overused, was slow-mo. Now, there is a ton of slow-mo in this during all of the action sequences. And I don't think there was actually an action sequence that didn't utilize that technique. So, in one way, at least it was consistent, but it did begin to feel a lot like a gimmick. In one of the early fights, though, the slow-mo was very effective and it was used to enhance the action. Now, one of the strengths of Black Adam is speed, and so we get this sequence much like that of the Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Future Past, where that character is racing around much faster than anything else in order to just move things out of the way and then save people. Now, this was the right time to use the slow-mo, to just really create anticipation and to allow us to see all of the elements that were about to collide when the movie begins again at full speed. There's a good cast of characters in this, and I loved the choice of actors for almost all of the roles. In addition to Dwayne Johnson, there's Aldis Hodge, Brosnan, Sarah Shahi, Bodhi Sabongui, Quintessa Swindell, Centineo, and Mohammed Amer. Now, Shahi and Sabongui are the main drivers for this story, aside from Johnson, and they really have great chemistry and presence. They made me root for the characters and then also feel afraid for their well-being. Now, it was easy to connect with them, and I really am glad that they had so much screen time because of all that chemistry. There's a bunch of superheroes pictured on the movie poster, and they're led by Aldis Hodge as Hawkman. Now, he's a commanding leader with a tiny bit of snark, and I really enjoyed his dynamic with Pierce Brosnan's Dr. Fate, but I do wish that we got more context and insight into their relationship. Pieces are hinted at, even with past antagonisms, but that's all we get. Really, it would have been nice to get more information and backstory on all of the other heroes in this. I know it's not their movie, but since we get introduced to 4 heroes, if you've not read the comics, which I haven't read the comics, then these are strangers. We don't need their entire life story, but just a bit of background would have been nice. And take, for example, Quintessa Swindell's Cyclone. Now, we're told she's incredibly smart, but we're never shown any of that. There's a conversation between her and Noah Centineo's Atom Smasher that suggests that she has just used her intelligence to benefit somebody. But the conversation is really awkward, like we're only hearing and seeing the tail end of the scene, like the rest of it had just been cut and forgotten about. It made this portion feel very out of place, and it didn't actually support the idea that Cyclone was super smart. And then another oddity in this same scene, Cyclone drops this sentence regarding her past, which sounded very intriguing and felt almost like a bombshell. And then, that's the last of the conversation. Noah Centineo's character feels like a punchline. But one that's really used incorrectly or at all the wrong times. He's supposed to provide some comic relief, and while he is a very likable actor, and he has a ton of charisma that just seeps from him, the character was kind of there and just a bumbling oaf. Even Dr. Fate is very intriguing as a character, but other than a quick, vague mention of his helmet, I'm not totally sure what he does. We can see how he uses his powers, but there feels like there's so much more to the character than what we're being shown. All right, I'm sure it sounds like I'm just bagging on this film with all of those negatives, but I did end up having some fun with this. There's an idea that's examined at the core of the story, which I really appreciated. The plot questions what makes a hero, and then the movie supports this all the way through with multiple different examples. And I love that aspect. It takes a superhero story and then makes us question who the hero is and what makes them one. It seems most of the time in these types of movies, we're just supposed to root for whoever is put up on the screen as the good guy. But sometimes good and bad aren't so easily separated, which this movie then addresses. I like the villain in this, but I hope that one of the arcs isn't supposed to be mysterious, because it just isn't. The trajectory is telegraphed so early on that I can't believe anybody would miss knowing well before the reveal happens. And I don't count this as a negative, but it was kind of funny to have something so obvious so early on, and then to save the reveal like this dun dun dun, just a moment that comes much later in the story. Now, I really enjoyed the score and the soundtrack too, but something in the sound design appeared to be out of place. I mean, at least in the showing that I watched. As part of Dr. Fate's powers, there are times where we'll hear his voice coming from multiple areas. Now, towards the end of the movie, it became incredibly difficult to hear his dialogue. Now, the side surround speakers were doing a good job of making his voice appear from all of these different angles, but it was never coming from the front, causing it to be indiscernible. Now, maybe it was just the showing that I was at, and I hope that your experience is going to be different. I absolutely loved the set design, especially at the beginning of the movie, where we're taking on kind of an Indiana Jones bit of exploring. And there are also a bunch of ruins spread throughout the city where the story takes place. And these ruins help to establish the history and even the longing of the people to have a hero to stand up for them. And I think Dwayne Johnson is a great choice as Black Adam. I mean, he's got this air of cockiness that fits with the character, but he's also able to convey softness and regret in his eyes, which are also necessary characteristics. And while the story is straightforward and it's easy to follow, there is a complexity that's introduced that I didn't see coming. I appreciated and I enjoyed this new layer as it gave the movie more depth and then emotional weight. And despite there being a large lack of background on the supporting heroes and then the massive amount of slow motion that's in play, I was still entertained by the story, and I loved watching The Rock become a great anti-hero. I mean, this isn't the best superhero movie, but it's still entertaining and fun. And there's also a mid-credit scene, so don't skip out before seeing that. So overall, Black Adam showcases a powerful anti-hero as well as charismatic characters, but also fails to create context for a lot of the supporting cast's involvement in the story. The action is violent and exciting, but relies too heavily on slow-mo to enhance the sequences. The central idea of what makes a hero is thought-provoking, while not spoon-feeding the audience an answer. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and then a ton of violence. I give Black Adam 3 out of 5 couches. So who's your favorite superhero? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.